So welcome back. Welcome. We're now doing part 13 of our talk on Operation Tonga. And we're heading now to a place, time was RAF Harwell. And the date is going to be, this is actually going to be the 6th of June, 1944. So RAF Harwell is coming up on the nose here, and this is in Oxfordshire. And you might not be able to recognize it today as an airfield, but this was where the paratroop 9th Battalion of the 3rd Parachute Brigade took off on their mission that evening. So this is Harwell. Now you can probably just about recognize some of these runways. Now if I showed you this is usually marked by car parks, but you can see here this is a runway, modern tarmac here, but look at these concrete blocks here laid down, and the runway goes all the way up to here. You can see the end of the runway there. So that's one of the runways. You have another runway, which is this, you can just make out this, where this straight road is now, through here, which is now used as the main route in. And the other runway, because they always came in threes, was here again. Look at the car park. It's taken over by a little bit by that building, but you can see it basically pops out over here. So this is RAF Harwell. Fascinating place, one that you could do a whole subject on its own, but this was it's the Rutherford Appleton Laboratory. They do a lot of work here on nuclear fusion. You can almost, this is almost I think a mini kind of CERN place. Lots of these RAF airfields were taken over with, almost like industrial estates, really. Lots of space. You can see the outline still today of the main, as I said, of the main runways. You even have, I believe, these round stalkies kind of roads, was possibly where anti aircraft batteries, as I said. There's another one there. Now, I presume they are from the Second World War. They might have been added on later because of the nature of this site. It might have needed Cold War protection as well. You can see here there's one there, but there's also this area around concrete here was probably a turning point for aircraft. And you can see also out in the fields here there is more sites, probably anti-aircraft positions around surrounding the position. This airfield was built in 1935, and there's a number of squadrons were based here. Um, 1944, the 38 group came here, which were the airborne forces, and this is where a lot of the TOWs, glider operations were launched from as well. I believe I may be wrong, but somewhere around here there is a memorial to the men who flew from here, killed on operation. And say it's subsequently it's been used for several purposes, including atomic energy research, fusion power research, and it's now it's called a science and innovation campus. But as I say, that's a very that's an interesting site, and I find these ex-RAF airfields quite an interesting subject just on their own. So I think I might do something about them, try and identify where they were and see how they've changed. So, we're now on our way to our mission. Now, whilst we're just going to fly down here, I'll just run through what the plan of Otway was, and then we can compare what the plan was to what actually happened. The back there at RAF Harwell, the advanced parties, the initial waves of Pathfinders, they took off at 11:10. So let's start keeping a record of the times. So we're talking 23:10, and it's on the 5th is when they took off, the very first people who were the advanced party. Otway's plan was always, because the drop zone, it was his drop zone, I believe, Victor, which was, as I said, was to the north west of Varaville, and their drop zone was about 2,500 yards to the southeast. So his plan was always to attack the battery from the southeast side, and he knew from Broadmoor that out that side there was a double barbed wire fence with a 30-yard minefield, and with a barbed wire fence 12 to 15 feet thick and 6 feet high. There was another minefield extended 100 yards around the battery from that point, and that was then surrounded by it was more like a wire cattle fence than anything, and it was possibly electrified. So these Pathfinders, they took off at 10 minutes past 11, and they were due to drop at 12:20. The initial drop was for these people who were split into what's known as a rendezvous party, the RV party, and then also the battery reconnaissance parties. So there was 12 members, 6 in each, and so 1 officer, 5 men. So one group would, the RV would establish the drop zone using the Eureka beacons, whilst the battery reconnaissance party their 6 would split into 2, 1 officer and 2 men, and they were to advance on the battery to make a quick study of the defences. The other 3, they actually went to a different battery, which I haven't been able to identify as yet, but it was sort of rumoured that it was a fake battery, so they were just sent to go and check to see if it was actually fake. Surprisingly, at 12:30, so it's between the main drop and the reconnaissance and RV parties, the RAF conducted a bombing run on the battery, which was consisted of 100 planes plastering the target with 400-pound bombs. And this gets pretty close to some of these reconnaissance people. So that seems like an error in their planning. They maybe should have put the bombers in first and then dropped the reconnaissance people. It might have been just that there was different speeds were taken across the channel, and one got ahead of the other. It's hard to say. The plan then was that at 12:35, 5 Horsas would land as close to the rendezvous point as possible, and these would be bringing in 6-pounder guns, tank guns, jeeps, scaling ladders, and Bangalore torpedoes. Then at 12:50, once the battalion had assembled, they would follow these tapes that have been going to be laid down by the reconnaissance party, and who would guide the battalion to the most suitable breaching point on the inner defences. So they would go through the cow fence, and they will go through the outer minefield, and they'll get to the inner fence and mark out the best place to breach. And so that was at 12:50, and then 4:30. This is where they would begin their attack. They would have a diversionary party, would feint attack round to the north part of the battery. Basically, we're using pits and brens, make as much noise as possible, and that's to distract the the Germans to look the other way as the breaching party, which would be Company B, would lay their Bangalore torpedoes and clear the wire. And this time as well, it's expected that 3 Horsa gliders would land inside the batteries, which sounds absolutely crazy. And these would be containing 4 officers and 54 men of A Company, and an attachment of sappers. With the gliders coming in, a bugle call will be sounded, and this will signal the mortars to switch from explosive. They will switch to a shells for illumination, and then the Bangalores would be blown. C Company would then charge in to rush the gun emplacements, and troopers, sappers would follow closely to destroy the guns. And so we're going to start this at 4:30. By 5:30, they would have an accompanying naval attaché with them, and he would be signalling HMS Arethusa. This is to tell them that if there's been a success, and if they hadn't received the signal, they would assume that the attack had failed, and they would open up on the battery with their 6-inch guns. So that's the plan, and we'll see how close it goes. When you read it, it sounds... I mean, it sounds doable, but there's a lot relying on the very first thing going right, which was making sure that the battalion lands in the right place. So that's the sort of main issue, isn't it? So, okay, so we're heading here. We're coming up on Shoreham. So let's get this the conditions set up correctly. I put it at June the 30th because that's when the full moon was in this year. The time then, we're talking midnight. We're going to have broken clouds, and just going to move. We'll just do the one layer of clouds that we knew from John Howard's mission. So let's make this. We know that the base is probably about 2,000. And the top's probably maybe 6,000. We'll leave it like that for now. Okay, that should be okay for now. Inside, let's switch on cockpit lights. We'll take off the beacon lights. Definitely don't want the landing lights on. And the navigation lights. So okay, so we've gone dark. We're going across the from Shoreham, and we're heading south. So I'm not sure if it was the case. I was reading and listening to Private Dennis Edwards' recount, and he said that the D Company went across between Worthing and Shoreham, and it kind of makes sense because those bases could have beacons on them that these guys can hone in on. So we're in the morning now, coming up sort of 5th, 6th, heading south. We should be at about 6,000 feet, but we're going to descend and we're going to be about 1,000 feet. Now, the jumping height of paratroopers, of course, on the actual evening, varies, but it's believed anywhere between 600 and 800 feet. So when we get out in, we'll presumably they used to wait until they could see the coast before they got down to jump height. So, what actually happened? And as I say, so the advance parties, they took off from 10 minutes past 11 from RAF Harwell, and the first. Oh, let me just show you some pictures of these guys whilst we're here. This is Terence Otway, Lieutenant Colonel, and the first battery reconnaissance party was commanded by this chap here, which is Major George Smith, and he's accompanied by Company Sergeant Major Bill Harold and Private George Dusty Miller. Dusty Miller is on the first out of the door at 12:20, and they all land in the correct place. Otway had just a quick note on the takeoff. He recalls that the main drop took off at 11:30. They had 36 aircraft, and he walked down every aircraft and said good luck to all of his captains. He reminded them that the most important part was to get to the rendezvous point and to try to avoid as many fights as possible, get to the RV point. So the Pathfinders jumped out, all three landed. The first battery reconnaissance landed correctly, but immediately had to take cover in a ditch when the aerial bombardment went in at 12:30. And the bombers missed their target. Didn't do any damage much, and the actual bombs fell between the battery reconnaissance party and the battery itself. They moved past the now burning village of Gonville-sur-Merville, and they waited on the edge of the battery for the taping party to arrive. The rendezvous party was led by Major Alan Parry, and this is this guy. He was the younger brother of George Parry, who was the Padre, and if you remember from previous episodes, he was the Padre that tried to stop the Germans from bayoneting the wounded at an aid station in Benouville. He lands, this Major Alan Parry, he lands, doesn't recognise where he is. He manages to find a few Canadian paratroopers who's dropped by this time using his duck recognition whistle, and the call and response system was Punch and Judy in this area. At 1 a.m. he meets up with Lieutenant Joe Worth, Major Eddie Charlton, and Captain Hal Hudson, and they make way to this bushy tree which is on a bank and marks the RV area. And so this is when he can hear the main drop coming in, and he starts trying to signal to the planes. So 11:30, I say, so about 20 minutes after the RV, the main force starts to come in. So we are looking here, time-wise, we're looking at about I think about 12:30. And this looks like a good place to wind this section up, and then we'll talk next about the drop. So we'll see you in part 13.